through the hot red tides of sin.
This is Faith Blind
Council.
Everything is within.
You create the light.
We are one.
That's it.
Oh, hey, hello. Hi, friends. Look at this. We're here.
Welcome to the party.
We're back. We're doing another show. Look at that. We're still here. This is the Faith Blind Council podcast. My name is Frater Dreadnought.
Frater Yaramarud.
Say hello.
And we are doing an episode today that is about a technique in chaos magic that, you know, is kind of an assumed thing. And I don't think there's a lot of conversation about it. And I kind of wanted to change that. So today we're going to be talking about paradigm shifting, specifically in chaos magic.
Yeah, because we approached it from the assumption that it was just like an unknown technique, and so like we didn't do this episode a lot earlier than we should have.
Yeah, and you know, probably in retrospect, we should have done this episode before we started talking about a bunch of different paradigms. But we already did those episodes, so now here we are.
That boat has fucking sailed and blocked the Suez Canal.
Oh, God. You know, my favorite part about that whole story was that there was very little, like, analysis, right? Like, there was if you were reading, like, Bloomberg or whatever, right? But, like, the people talking about it on, like, Twitter or whatever, it was just like, lol, boat stuck. Like, nobody was trying to, like, turn it into anything.
What happened? This big-ass boat drew a giant dick in the Red Sea and then lodged itself in the Suez Canal. Awesome!
Right? It was like, well, what does this mean? I don't know, boat's stuck. Like, no. That was just literally all it was. And like, the thing is, it's potentially like this fucking detrimental, horrendous impact thing that happened, right? And no one gave a shit. Everyone was just like, lol, boat's stuck. Smiley face emoji, shrug. Yeah, no, it's stuck. Like, what a good time. What a time to be alive. It's like a revival of like neo-Dadaism, which I hate. But here we are. Okay, paradigm shifting. Let's talk about it. Let's be about it. So, if you recall all the way back to our very first episode, our definition of a paradigm is more or less any dogmatic belief structure, right?
Or just like a perception or a philosophy of how the world works.
You can think of it as a technical jargon term to replace religion or philosophy. We use paradigm as a means of separation so that we can talk about that in a more specific way. There's a word for this that I'm trying
Objectively?
Metadiscursive. It's a metadiscursive thing where like
okay.
we're changing the language so we can talk about the language without all of the loaded, you know what I mean? Like without all the loaded conception about it. So that is our definition of a paradigm. What then is paradigm shifting? Paradigm shifting, in my mind, is literally just switching between different ways of looking at the world, right? If you're using a paradigm as being a way of looking at the world, obviously to shift through that is to change how you look at the world. And thus look at yourself.
Yeah. I mean, and it's having a fluidity and not sticking to anything rigidly, and because with the whole idea of, you know, us saying and having the idea that belief is a tool, well, beliefs are flexible. Because like, you know, science believed for a very long time that sickness was caused by something called miasma, just bad air. And then new information came, and then that belief changed. Now, you know, we believe in germ theory. Just like beliefs change, and so you have to have that same kind of fluidity rather than just dogmatic. No, it says here in this book that this is what the truth is, and I'm sticking to it because the book says so.
during the time, and I have no idea if this is actually true or not, but I want to say I remember reading this somewhere that like when germ theory was first being introduced and discussed, when the idea was presented, the main kickback against it was a doctor is a gentleman and a gentleman's hands are never dirty.
Yeah.
Like that
Right.
was
Yeah.
Sound logic. Sound.
Like, they were literally just like, no, doctors aren't like dock workers. Dock workers have dirty, gross hands. Doctors don't have that. We're gentlemen. Our hands are never dirty. We don't need to wash our hands.
Yeah, and like there was a whole fight against, just dudes, just fucking just wash your hands. No! I won't do it! No! Just run some soap and some water. No!
Dude,
Well,
no!
and wasn't there like that period of time where actually the idea of washing like dirt off of you is kind of like actually against God, because that's how you're supposed to be, and like there's I know there's a time period of that, like during like kind of pre-industrial or just industrial enlightenment area where people, especially the poor, wouldn't wash because that was considered ungodly.
Yeah, all during the medieval period, like it was Western European, it was shameful to wash, because by doing so you were basically putting pride in your own body, which you should not be doing. You should, because pride is a sin. And so what you should do instead is glorify God and not give a shit about your bodily appearance or anything. And so like there was one saint, I forget what his name was, but he prided himself in the fact that from the day he was born until the day he died, he never took a bath.
that is disgusting.
That is disgusting, but it's also, you're just misplacing that pride. Like, now you're proud that you never took a bath, you filthy, filthy Christian.
That was the birth of the scumpunk movement, and now here we are. So thanks for that, you fucking douchebag.
Fucking train hoppers, all thanks to Christianity.
There was like this weird supposition, right, where people didn't want to like wash the dirt off of them because that would acknowledge the existence of the dirt on them. Where like if you just didn't wash, then like it wasn't there. It's like if you don't go to the doctor, then you really don't have cirrhosis because a doctor hasn't told you that you have cirrhosis. Yeah. And then you just die of an unconfirmed cause because nobody
it wasn't cirrhosis and you can't prove it. But anyway, back to paradigm shifting. It's necessary, like, as not just, in your growth in your magical practice, but like your growth as a person, to realize that, ideas can change. And you need to be able to embrace that. You need to know that things can change. And, sometimes it's not only is it effective for magic, just like constantly keeping things novel and interesting and whatever, but it's also, it's a good mental practice. Kind of like how we discussed with you going through like the 30 days of Tantra and you just saying like, it's fucking bullshit. But you at least went through the effort of like approaching it like, okay, how can I frame my mind in such a way to be able to perceive the world from this point of view? Yeah.
I know, Robert Anton Wilson talks about it a lot in Prometheus Rising. And it's an interesting book because at the end of each chapter, there's little exercises he wants you to do. And a lot of them have to do with like, go, like, if you're, conservative, go read, liberal magazine every, week or something, and go, get into the mind tunnel of being a Nazi, just what would that feel like and is like, and trying, like, because the idea is to unprogram yourself,
Boy, that is a super privileged take. That is a take that only a fucking white dude could come up with. Of like, oh, go ahead and like put yourself in the mind frame of being a Nazi. The people that murdered everybody. Like, geez. I mean, I understand the like.
Well, he definitely likes going to extremes in these. Like, he wants you to like, you didn't like Tantra when you tried it. The idea is like, well, how can you really understand or possibly deprogram yourself from what you're, being taught if you can't at least, attempt to put yourself in the mind space of somebody you absolutely loathe to some extent.
Yeah, it's like, there. What was it's the Sun Tzu thing of know your enemy.
Yeah.
Like, fuck it. Like, but also, there's a certain, like, I feel like there's a certain conversation about that level of paradigm shifting where, like, you are under no obligation to try and understand a Nazi's point of view.
That's true. I wouldn't tell anybody they have to do that.
Right, like, you are under no obligation to try and understand the point of view of, like, a fucking, like, white nationalist fucking dude who's appropriating Norse mythology. Fuck those people. Like, I don't care about them. I have no, like, their opinions mean less than nothing, right? That being said, I feel like a lot of those arguments are ripe for bad faith, right?
Well, there's also, like, there's a sect within, I think it's Hinduism. It's a form of asceticism where, okay, so within the Hindu paradigm, you have all of these taboos and aspects and everything. Like, there are things that you just shouldn't do. So, like, you avoid drinking alcohol, you avoid all of the vices, and we talked about this in the left hand and right hand path episode, where, like, they avoid the vices and they avoid, like, going after what you want, and instead of avoiding taboos, you embrace them. So, like, they'll live in, like, garbage heaps. They'll, like, drink, like, they'll drink their booze out of the skulls of dead people who had just recently passed. They just dig up their bones and start drinking from them. Like, all of these aspects that every other person in the society is just like, no, that's fucking gross. Why are you doing that? Stop being gross. And their purpose in doing it is like, no, we do this because, reality's fucking dumb, and if there weren't, like, it goes back to that whole, like, duality thing where, if there aren't any bad things, how can you appreciate good things? So we're just wallowing around in filth to figure shit out.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, sure, do that. Like, I'm not your dad. You do whatever you want, I suppose. It's not for me. I prefer my booze to be in a cup because that's just what I like.
I don't want to live in garbage. I don't want to run the risk of getting sepsis.
I've already done the part of my life where I lived in garbage. And I don't want to do it again. It was not particularly enlightening. So, no, is the answer to that. And I think, like, that kind of gets to the core of like paradigm shifting in chaos magic, and where it separates from something like eclectic witchcraft, right? So, like, in eclectic witchcraft, you generally have, like, this collection of practices and beliefs that you are constantly building upon, right? So, like, you build, like, a personal pantheon. You pull from whatever these sources that work for you, and it is a kind of a years and years long building of whatever beliefs and personal dogma works for you, right? But you never really switch away from it, in chaos magic, when you shift, there is an aspect where you are discontinuing your belief in whatever it was you were working with before, right?
Yeah.
It frees you up in a way that you can work in two completely opposite, like, worldviews, right? Because you are using belief as a tool, you can discontinue the use of one tool in favor of another, and you are able to, like, it frees you up to be like, oh, I was just working this, like, anti-cosmic current, right? Well, now I'm going to shift gears entirely and do, like, traditional right-hand path, like, Kabbalistic Enochian magic, right? You can do that because belief is a tool. It's not a be-all, end-all of anything. And, like, you do that and figure out which one works.
Right, and, like, one fun aspect of, actually switching paradigms is like closing out the last one and just doing a ritual where you realize everything that what you had been doing with that paradigm is just as much nonsense as what you're going to do with the next one. So like if you have a venerated god or statue or some shit, and like you've been spending all of this time worshiping this statue and paying attention to the statue and like treating it as an embodiment of the god you're dealing with, once you're done, just fucking huck it in the trash. Like, it's done. I'm over it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean anything to me anymore.
Right? Or like, take it and, maybe just sell it to a secondhand shop. Like, fuck it. just
might
give
be
it
cursed.
to somebody else. Here, have yourself a cursed statue, buddy. I feel like that because of that, like, the severity of shifting in Chaos Magic, that's part of what gives Chaos Magic a really bad name. And I also feel like there is a conversation, it gets back, we've had this conversation before on this show, and I'm sure we'll have it again, where Chaos Magic has been coined as the magic of appropriation, right?
Yeah.
And to an extent, I like personally think that's true, because that's the definition of what you're doing is you are taking a belief structure and you are using it for your own goals, right? Like that is the definition of appropriation,
Right.
There's a lot of murkiness when it comes to like, okay, are you now profiting off of this and like not giving credit where credit is due? Are you not treating it with the respect that it deserves? Those are really shitty individual practices, right? But like appropriation is such a loaded term that it's hard to have a conversation about without getting into a very like murky situation.
I mean, first of all, like if you're doing your own private practice and everything and you're doing it by yourself and like you're not involving a bunch of other people, who the fuck cares what you do? Like you're not selling books, you're not coming across as some fucking guru. You're just building a shrine in your home to, whatever deity does whatever. Like you're not hurting anyone. Who the fuck cares?
Yeah. I think that there's like validity to that. I think that there's also like it goes back to kind of what we were talking about before, right? With the idea of a doctor is a gentleman and a gentleman's hands are never dirty. You cannot have a conversation about that level of appropriation if people are not like if chaos magicians are not willing to acknowledge the like basis of appropriation in that model, right?
Right.
And that, again, circles around to it's hard to have that conversation because appropriation is such a loaded term.
Yep.
And it's like, you kind of have to get to a point where, like, you are okay with that. And you can do it in a way that is not, like, detrimental,
Right.
I think that it definitely, like, it exists on a spectrum, right? There is a huge difference between like setting up an ancestor altar and venerating your ancestors, which is, many different cultures do that, versus like you setting up a specific altar, figuring out how it works for you based on like for Yoruba tradition, right? And then publishing a book on that. Like if I were to go out and then publish a book on like, oh, this is how I set this up and how it works for me. And like, I'm now not giving back to that community and like that tradition in any way. Like that's pretty fucked up.
Either that or just like claiming yourself as a master in it because you happen to do it. And you weren't part of the tradition where it was handed down and saying like, yeah, well, I did fucking, Sufism for a really long time. And yeah, I'm a white dude who lives in America who's never participated in any Muslim activities whatsoever. But guess what? I learned how to read Arabic on Duolingo, and I translated like 2 lines from the Quran. So suck it. This is how you do Sufism.
I'm interested in your take on this, Cologne. As far as like, do you think there's like a level that's acceptable? Do you think that like it's either all in or all out?
Well, I mean, at my place in practice right now, I haven't ever been all in for any particular paradigm yet. Like, I'm still just sort of fucking around with a bunch of different things and haven't really focused hard on one. But as for the appropriation thing, I mean, I think you put it well with, you're using it as a tool for your own private practice. I do feel uncomfortable when I see, like, people, like, selling tarot readings and stuff like that, or using other aspects of occultism that is probably not a part of their heritage at all, and then, selling that to other people or telling other people about it, or trying to teach other people. I don't think that's appropriate at all.
Yeah, I see. I mean, like, I can see where that, like, comes from,
But one of my other arguments too is, like, saying that that you're not able to participate in this culture because you're not part of the culture. Okay, well, how many fucking other cultures conquered other ones before you came about it? Like, say you can't practice ancient Egyptian paradigm because you're not Egyptian. Yeah, well, the ancient Egyptians in both the upper and lower kingdoms conquered the shit out of people and forced them to practice their religion. That happened everywhere. Like, that happened in Native American tribes, where it's like, okay, well, the Sioux Nation took over the Cree or something. And it's like, well, these are our deities now, and this is what you're working with, and you can't really practice old ones. That's not right. You can't do that. We've conquered you. Stop it. Because religion, for the most part, a lot of people forget, is that it was also very much a measure of control over people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a certain level of validity to on an individual level, right? If you're talking about the idea that you can't do this because X, Y, or Z, right? I grew up and lived in an area where people twisted that, like, specifically white people twisted that idea of, like, you can't listen to hip hop because you're white, right? Like, you can't truly understand it. And it became this weird twisted, like, white kids should not act black. Like, there's a level where, like, things, again, it comes down to, like, arguments being made in bad faith. And yeah, I think that there's something to be said about, because chaos magic is such a, like, personalized and individual practice, that it comes down to what can you put your head on the pillow and sleep at night with, right? If it works for you to take a very, like, insular paradigm and work with it, and you can, like, it works for you and you can sleep at night doing that, then who fucking cares? I also understand that for me to say that is a very privileged take.
From my experience, a lot of people who claim cultural appropriation and shit are also coming from a privileged place. So, like, for example, during our interview with the Appalachian Folk Magic, right? When we had talked to our guest, like, we had asked, like, okay, well, what's your opinion on people learning and practicing these things? And her response was, no, that's great. I love it because this is a tradition that's dying. Like, no one's doing it anymore. Like, it's not getting the respect that it deserves. And so by people actually learning and practicing it, it's keeping the tradition alive.
Yeah, I think that there's a line between people learning and practicing the tradition and then people selling it.
Right.
And I think that's the conversation.
I think capitalism has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, that's a conversation that people don't have because, like, it's just, again, how loaded appropriation is. Like, that's where the starting point is that people are selling and profiting off of it, right? It's the fucking Anthony Bourdains of the world that are going to Oaxaca, getting recipes from, like, old grannies that show them how to make cornflour tortillas, coming back into the United States, publishing a book, not giving any credit, not giving any money, and just fucking pillaging that culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is the starting point. That, like, when you have a conversation, that's what everybody assumes. So let's get into kind of like some more basic stuff, as far as like, how to define like paradigm shifting and where it comes from, right? So to start off with, I'm going to go with, there's a quote that Peter Carroll has in the introduction to Liber Null and Psychonaut, that I think kind of sums up really the basis that you come from when you're talking about paradigm shifting. And the quote is, "Two major themes run throughout this book. One, that altered states of consciousness are key to unlocking one's magical abilities. And two, these abilities can be developed without any symbolic system except reality itself." So what Carroll is basically saying there is that whatever symbol set that you are using, i.e. like whatever dogma, whatever religion, whatever, pantheon you're using, those symbols are entirely unnecessary. Like, you do not need to use them to practice chaos magic.
Right. Because it's always ever been, like, with chaos magic, a series of techniques. It's never been a dogmatic principle. It's never been like, these are the, all of the steps and exercises you have to do in order to obtain this result. No, it's just, here are all of the steps, mix them up however the fuck you want, put whatever paint or coat of paint on it you want, and like, as long as it works for you, otherwise stop it.
Yeah. I think that a lot of people get caught up in god forms, and it can be detrimental after a while, right? Because you get stuck in these ruts of doing things that where it might have once been an empowering thing to do, it ends up being severely limiting to your practice.
Yeah,
because you are now you're stuck in one way of looking at it,
Right, and it's still really common, and it's hard to escape within like even like chaos magic communities and shit, where say like with a specific god form or something, like you'll see like some kind of shifty kind of behavior, and something's kind of like fucking with you and whatever, and you're like, oh, that's Loki, because that's just classic Loki. And it's like, well, no, maybe it was, Parvati who was just having a kind of funny day. Like, you're still putting like these traditional things on it. Like, if you weren't dealing with a specific deity, who's to say like he was the one who did it? And also laying down concepts like, no, like if you're gonna do it with like this, if you're gonna work with this deity, like you need to like offer fucking iron and salt and all that. Well, why? Who said that? Like, if you're working with the deity and it's like, you know what? I have fucking mountains of salt, and I'm trying to make, like, a really good fucking risotto, and I have no saffron. Could you hook me up with that shit? And you're like, fuck yeah, Ares, have all the saffron you want.
Yeah. I feel like this makes me think of, there was a post on the Facebook group a while ago, where someone had posted and they were talking about venerating the old gods using disco.
That's kind of awesome.
And the idea was basically like to sit there and assume that like these god forms have not evolved with like time passing is to assume that these gods are dead.
Yeah.
And that they have not, like, you're going to sit there and tell me that like there was no like god that was present during the like inception of disco, or like any like big shifting thing like that. Like, you're telling me there's no god of punk rock or of hip hop or of any of those things, that the gods don't like that. They still want people banging around on fucking like lutes and djembes and shit. No, that's fucking dumb.
Yep, the gods only listen to fucking Heilung, and if you're wrong, eat shit.
But it was a really interesting and kind of like provocative post that like I think gets lost when people get again stuck in that rut of like God form veneration, you know. And that kind of, I feel like that was something that led to us doing the Project MPM as well.
Well, and like from my own experience and everything, like I'll be real honest. The reason I do paradigm shifting is because I get bored. And like I'll be working in a paradigm for a while, and then after a while it's just like, I'm like, yeah, sure, I can learn more things in this, and there are more books to read about it, but I'm just bored with it. I'm tired. I want to look into something else. I want to find something new. I want to find some new stories. And so, like, I'll just switch into something else because I get bored.
Well, and like magic to a certain extent. Like, magic requires true inspiration.
Right.
If you're bored with something, you're not going to be inspired by it.
Yeah.
I feel like that's, again, it gets to the crux of paradigm shifting. If you are bored with something, just stop doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's how you burn out on shit. You just like, okay, this is, you know, it's boring. I don't want to do it. But then you feel like you have to do it.
Right. Well, and like another thing that's like really important, and part of the reason I do paradigm shifting is the fucking aesthetic. The aesthetic is so much different. Like, okay, if I'm working with like how I had done like during a 2-year-long period of doing Gnosticism or some shit, it's like that's just Gnosticism as far as like aesthetics to me is just like some dude sitting around reading books and like praying a lot. And so I got bored doing that. And so like I wanted more happy fun party times and like more like, so with like Gnosticism, it's all like super fucking serious and shit. Like you've got these fucking archons and you have these angels and like it's all very serious. But like then I wanted to have like good fun times, like actually deal with deities that had fucking personality apart from no. So so then like I moved on to like voodoo. So like that, like their rituals are parties. Like they incorporate lots of alcohol and food and drumming and dancing and like it was fun.
It's a much more lively atmosphere.
Yeah, and then you've got deities like the Gede family who are just about like, you know, getting drunk, smoking, and telling dirty jokes, and that's awesome.
Yeah, they're fucking party monsters, and they also are like obsessed with death. Like, I get it. But not in like a weird fucking Morrissey way. They're like, fuck yeah, we're all gonna die, let's do it. Like,
yeah.
You know.
As opposed to the Archons and like the fucking the Source and Yaldabaoth and all of this shit where like it's just no. Stop it. All the time. All the time. That's what their religion is. Don't
do this or else you won't die right.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking stupid. Well, and here's the thing that, like, it blows my mind that so, like, people miss the mark on, like the Apocrypha of John, right? Or any of the hidden books, right? I'm thinking of the Secret Book of John, where it's laying out, like Sophia and all of this stuff. That whole thing is an allegory about the fucking Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Like, that whole thing is an allegory about organized literalist religion. That's all it is. All it is like making fun of that by like assigning 300 angels to the different parts of the body. There's like angels that are like in governance of your fucking fingers and shit. Like, that's literally just whoever wrote that was just like, yep, no, we totally need this. It's the most sarcastic book that I think I've ever read.
I can't help jerking off at this party because Gabriel has control of my hand. I can't stop it. It's the angels.
Yeah. Like, it literally is just like the most tongue-in-cheek fucking bullshit ever, right? And I feel like it was like, that's been missed.
Yeah.
Right? Because now There are people who are actually reading it and thinking like, oh, I've got to fucking figure out these archons in my own personal life. And the whole thing is just this joke.
Well, yeah, I think people miss a lot on that all the time. Like, having spent a lot of time, like, in my studies in anthropology and shit, and we've talked about this on, like, Discord and on Facebook and shit like that, but, like, one of my big problems with things like Ancient Aliens, and not only is it racist as fuck, but there's also the supposition that our ancestors didn't have imaginations.
Yeah, it's the idea that our ancestors were fucking stupid.
Yeah.
Right, and they didn't have, like, the internet, and they didn't have, like, fucking TV and shit. Like, you're just hanging out all day in your fucking town. Like, you already worked the fields for, like, 6 hours. What are you doing now? Well, I went home, and then I just have to go to sleep, I guess, instead of, like, hanging out with people and telling stories and making shit up to keep people entertained, because what else is there to do? Well, you can chew on a turnip, I guess. That's what we can do tonight. But we chewed on turnips for the last 3 months. Okay, well, let's make up a card game and tell some stories and make people laugh, because that's a lot more entertaining than just fucking chewing turnips. And you have, oh, well, with Ancient Aliens, you have, oh, well, we have these deities who, like, built this fucking tower and whatever. No, they didn't. It's just, that sounds a lot more impressive than, like, yeah, like Fred over there, he got bored one day and was just like, I'm gonna build some rocks. So
I really, like, one of my favorite things that happened on Ancient Aliens, which, like, it doesn't happen very often. It happened in, like, the early episodes, where the dude with the hair would be like, could this be evidence of extraterrestrial life visiting the planet Earth? And then it would just smash cut to an actual historian being like, no,
it wasn't. It wasn't. And like, when I say that show's fucking racist as fuck, I want to actually, you know, provide evidence for that. It's generally the fact that, like, well, since all of these, you know, not white people had these advanced technologies and everything, they were not white, so they couldn't figure it out. It had to have been aliens.
Yeah. Like, there is such a massive whitewashing of history.
Yeah.
That, like, and like, literally, that is institutional racism, by the way.
Yes.
Like, that is what institutional racism looks like. Is just this supposition that because Egyptians were brown, they could not have figured out math.
Yeah. Yeah, and and then, like, there's that supposition of they didn't have imaginations. And, like, I remember having an argument with someone, you were there, Dreadnought, and it was about, they were talking about the fucking Salem witch trials and shit, and they were like, well, we had all of these first-hand account papers where they said with their own mouths, like, they went out into the woods and saw a goat, and they had to sign a book and, like, lick the goat's asshole. And if this didn't actually happen, why did all of these people say this? Well, here's fucking why. You had an entire tribunal who was like, okay, well, you got two options. Either we're going to torture you until you confess, and then you're gonna die, or you confess, and you're gonna die. So it was a lot easier. Like, you don't think our ancestors were smart enough to just be like, well, I'll tell them whatever the fuck they want. Like,
right?
I'll
make some shit up.
I don't want to get fucking tortured. So, yeah, there was this fucking black goat and shit. And, yeah, like, I tongued his ass all night so that way I could curse my neighbor with a dead cow. So,
well, it also completely, like, circumnavigates the idea that these people were being fed leading information of, like it just completely, like, gets rid of the idea that, like, some fucking, like, angry honky was sitting there with his hammer and his book and being like, it is said that you're in the woods with a black goat tonguing ass and drinking booze. And someone was just like, yeah, sure, fuck it, whatever.
Does that mean I don't get the thumb screws? Then yes, that's what happened.
Yeah, sure, fuck it. I'll tell you whatever you want to hear. Like, it's so goddamn stupid. And it's just, everything is made up. Everything is fucking lies and bullshit. Who cares? Pick the lying and the bullshit that you like the most.
Yeah, it's all
You
about
know.
aesthetic. What kind of lying
Yeah.
bullshit do you want?
Yeah, and that is kind of like the next big point that I want to talk about, is that if nothing is true, then aesthetic is everything in Magic.
Yeah.
Like, we spend a bunch of time talking about, like, well, I have this Athame, and I have my chalice, and I have my fucking pentagram, and I have all of this stuff to do all of my magic with because it represents the 4 elements, and it represents all of this stuff. Who fucking cares? We made all of that shit up. We made it all up. We didn't know a goddamn thing. There's no, like, not that we made up the forces behind it, but it goes back to the Phil Hine quote of confusing the map for the territory.
Right.
We're looking at the map that we are, figured out, or somebody figured out, and now we're saying that that's how you have to do it. That's fucking dumb.
Right. If the map is telling you that thing over there is definitely a valley, and you walk into it and break your nose because it's actually a wall, well, the map's wrong.
Yeah, of what use was the map? It broke your nose.
I think aesthetic is very important, and like, because Peter Carroll had mentioned this in his other like papers and everything too, like in Principia Chaotica, he has a quote which is, beliefs not, or in chaos magic, beliefs are not seen as an end in themselves, but as tools for creating desired effects. To fully realize this is to face the terrible freedom in which nothing is true and everything is permitted, which is another, like, fucking misconception. Like, people are like, oh, nothing's true, everything is permitted, I can do whatever the fuck I want. Well,
You can.
you can. But Carroll goes on further saying, which is to say that everything is possible, there are no certainties, but the consequences can be ghastly. So, yeah, you can do whatever the fuck you want, but, like, there's still gonna be consequences, my dude.
It makes me think of the webcomic of the kid riding his bike and then he puts the stick in his own front spoke.
Yeah.
And the bike fucking, like, crashes. And he's like, stupid stick!
Yeah,
Like,
right. And, like, he goes on further talking about, like, how the purpose of chaos rituals is to create beliefs by acting as though such beliefs were true. In chaos rituals, you fake it till you make it to obtain the power that a belief can provide. Afterwards, if you have any sense, you will laugh it off and seek the requisite beliefs for whatever you want to do next as chaos moves you. And this goes back to, like, our first episodes where we were talking about, like, what kind of magic works for us and shit, and I had always said, like, there's a certain thing about ceremonial magic, it makes me believe it a bit more, because, like, I'm putting all of this effort and shit into it, so, like, it kind of, like, hardwires my brain, where it's like, okay, you're doing something serious now, it has all of these fucking steps, don't fuck it up. But, I mean, that's not saying that it's the true way, like, that shit doesn't work for you. So I don't expect...
No, God, no.
Yeah, so I don't expect you to do it. So, like, it's all fucking aesthetic. If you want to take all of these fucking steps, then do it because it works, not because you have to.
Okay, so I guess my question then to you, Cologne, with all of this in mind, what would you describe your aesthetic as magically?
Oh. It's pretty all over the place.
Because we've got Yarmaroods, which is just like Yarmarood makes you eat your vegetables for an hour, and that's magic. What is yours?
I think mine is. When I think about some of the rituals I've designed and I work with, I like. I don't necessarily use the word silly, but I kind of like rituals that come off as feeling a bit silly. There's something about that breaks you out of the everyday, kind of seriousness of the world. So like some of the rituals I've created are definitely in that means. I'm very analytical and intellectual, but I'm not as much into the ritual, like ceremonial, as Yara is. But I do like something that's clever, that definitely is very lots of symbolism and like metaphor worked in to my rituals.
And
Yeah.
I like the aspect of having like that balance there, especially when you do work with other people. And say you have like a night where you all just like get together and do rituals and shit like that. You don't want a whole fucking night where it's just people like me doing super serious bullshit. It's boring. And it is
Well, not only
overwhelming and it's tedious and just like, oh god. And so it's good to have someone who's like, okay, after this, we're gonna fucking, pop a bunch of balloons and slap each other with Jello, and that's a ritual. Like, it helps.
Yeah, like here's a ritual where we're going to mud wrestle, right? Like you want something where you want to pick the energy up, right? I feel like a word that would describe what you've said, Cologne, would be like you have this very whimsical view of how magical things happen. And it's about tapping into that, right?
Yeah, I like that word, whimsical. Add a little whimsy
And
to your magic.
But I also think on the flip side, it's also important to have like, some serious aspects to it too. Because if like you get with a bunch of people and all it is just super weird shit, then it's like, okay, well, now we're just like, this just feels kind of like preschool now. And can we like do something that, doesn't involve just making a mess?
Yeah, like, and that's why I said, like, the kind of the analytical side of me, where I like to make that representative of something. It should, connect with something. It's not just silly or whimsy for the sake of it, as much as it's
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's applied discordia.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good approach to have. Trying to achieve that balance, and that balance falls into a lot of things. Like, the Buddha was very correct in there being a middle path.
Yeah, and I think that like group settings are a perfect example of why paradigm shifting is really necessary. It's a good tool to have and to develop. Because if you're doing a magic night where you're having, 5 or 6 or 7 or however many people, where you're all introducing these rituals, I always like to think of group magic as like a tech demonstration.
Oh, I always thought of it. I always thought it as like adult show and tell.
Yeah. It's a chance for you to take this thing that you've been working on for the past, months, weeks, years, whatever, right? And show it to your group of colleagues of like, hey, this is a thing that I've been working on that's like, an evocation method, or here's a thing that I've been doing that's really helped me with charging sigils, or really helped me with a daily divination practice, or whatever, right? And I want to show you how this thing works. Well, in order for you as a magician, like if I'm presenting a ritual to you as a magician need to be able to shift your paradigm to understand the potential for this thing working, regardless of what your personal belief is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's good having those other perspectives coming in and like showing you like different methods of doing things, because you might have overlooked them. You might have forgotten about a specific technique, or a new technique becomes novel or something. And so you can take that back to your own practice and be like, hey, so when I did this thing, like it had quite an impactful outcome and it worked really well, and it was like, it put me in a space that was good, so I'm going to incorporate something similar into my own practice. So it helps. Yes. It helps evolve your shit a lot. So that's, I do, like, we do have a lot of, solo practicing listeners and everything, and that's not bad, but I do think that there is something good to be had from group ritual.
Yeah. I personally think that like the most effective magic you're going to do is going to be magic you do on your own. But I think that some of the best inspiration you're going to get is going to come from group magic.
Yes.
So, you go and you figure these things out and you're like, oh, well, I want to try and incorporate this aspect into my personal practice, One of the big things for that for me has been divination in general. I was never super into divination when I was first starting out. For the first several years I was doing sigil magic, I didn't do any divination whatsoever. I wasn't really, like, I didn't see the inherent value of it. I didn't really see, like, okay, what matters about whether, you know, being able to see what's coming down the road, right? If I'm doing this sigil and I know the sigil's going to work because I did the sigil and I did the ritual to charge the sigil, it's going to work. Like, why do I need to divine for it, you know? And it also had to do with I was very, very deep in, like, a nihilistic rut of, like, fuck it either does or it doesn't. Who cares, you know? But when I started working with other magicians and I started doing group work, and I was, you know, not even in ritual, but just through talking to other magicians and figuring out, like, no, these are the practical applications. Like, this is what you can do with divination. That, like, really changed my outlook, and now divination is a very, like, core part of my practice. So there's that. I want to get a quick break in here, and then we can come back and we can talk about some specific techniques for paradigm shifting. And I know that, Yara, you have some you know, personal experience to talk about. Cologne, I'm interested to hear if you've got any, and I'm pretty sure I've got some as well. So let's get a real quick break in, and then we will come back and we will talk some more about paradigm shifting.
Are you looking for one-of-a-kind handmade tools to add to your left-hand path practice? West of Hell masterfully crafts items ranging from leather masks to wands made from authentic human bone, all to aid you in your crusade against the tyranny of the demiurge. Prayer beads consecrated to Lucifer or Hecate, hand-etched magic mirrors, and even Chaos Star inverted rosaries are all part of their expanding inventory. Get started on your journey to bring down the powers and elevate your own godhood with tools, jewelry, and apparel from West of Hell. Visit them online at westofhell.square.site. That's WESTOVHELL.square.site.
We would like to give a shout out to the Chaos Coven, or Church of Nothing. The Chaos Coven is a Chicago-based chaos magic working group led by Naya Ein and Ninov. They host workshops every third Saturday of the month from 3 to 5 p.m. at the Occult Bookstore in Chicago, Illinois. Considered by some to be the oldest spirit shop in the world. Each class is pay as thou wilt with a $15 suggested donation. You can find the Chaos Coven and the Occult Bookstore on Facebook or occultbookstore.com.
All right, so we're back here, and I want to get into talking about, like, some specific techniques to help with paradigm shifting. For me, I think that, like, it's great to talk about in a kind of more theoretical sense, and it is a largely theoretical practice, right? But there are certain things that you can do that will help ease the transition, and as you do it more and more, it will become more natural. I think that, like, a couple of really important things for it are, one, as with everything, meditation, right? Specifically insight meditation into figuring out what makes you tick and realizing how little of it has to do with the actual, like, symbols that you're using, and more with what those symbols represent to you. And you can then figure out, like, once you figure out those kind of, like, base emotional attachments, you can, like, dissociate from that, right?
Okay, so any of the technique that you had just mentioned with the meditation and any other technique that we bring up is going to be particularly useful for anyone who is first coming into magic. Particularly because just coming into it, you're going to have all of these preconceptions, or like myself, I had been drenched in dogma growing up and everything, and there are lots of other people who I have spoken to who are as well, who come from more traditional backgrounds and everything, and you need to learn how to shed that.
Yeah.
So, like, with the insight meditation, like, figuring out, like, why you believe what you do. Okay, well, first coming into magic and everything is, do you believe that magic is evil and wrong because your parents taught you or your culture taught you that it was evil and wrong? Well, why did they say that? Well, did they have any first-hand experience with it? Probably not. Or if you come from an extremely, like, scientific and, very, like, dismissive kind of background or everything. Well, why do I dismiss it? Like it clearly works for other people. Is this just like a placebo effect? Well, so the fuck what? What if it is? I mean, you have to try it to figure it out. If it's the placebo effect and if it's like active placebo effect, why would you not utilize that tool? Like that, if you can utilize something that completely like changes your mind to the point where it can make things good happen to you, why not use that? That's silly. But yeah.
I mean, the practical answer to that is because it's more trouble than it's worth. It's like a paradigm that I have recently shifted out of had a specific ritual for like being more energized and having more energy throughout the day. And it was a ritual that basically took about an hour and a half, give or take. But the ritual wasn't just taking a goddamn nap.
Yeah.
Like, the ritual was, like, you had to do all this stuff and do all this, like, liturgical praying and make a petition paper and do all of this shit and meditate and whatever. And it's just like, you want to feel more steady energy throughout the day? Real easy way to do that. Cut out the sugar in your diet and take a fucking nap.
Yeah.
Like, so and sometimes, yes, it is just more trouble than it's worth. But not always. Like, hey, if I can do a fucking doodle on a piece of paper and that's gonna, like, up my chances of being more confident in a job interview, yeah, I'm gonna do it.
Right, and, like, then it goes back to the whole concept of, you know, what is magic and everything, and it's, you know, enacting your will upon your reality in order to obtain the things that you want. And so, like, in that, using that as a definition, basically any act of will is an act of magic. If you're thirsty, go get a drink. That's an act of magic. Go get something, go grab a glass of water. There you go. You magicked your thirst away. That's...
You did it.
But yeah,
yeah,
insight meditation is very important.
Yeah, and that's not one that's going to help, like, right away. It's a kind of a
ongoing
cumulative practice.
It's ongoing.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, acutely, one of the things that you can do that helps a lot, like, in the moment, is doing, like, an anathema ritual.
Yes. That was my other, like, first suggestion, doing an anathema ritual, in which what that is you basically kind of defile the, concepts or philosophy or religion that you had previously been a part of.
Yeah. There is, you know, I feel like that was one of the first things that we had you do as, like, a quest, Cologne, was doing, like, making up an anathema ritual.
Yeah, or getting rid of something that I held sacred. Yeah, that was one of the first things.
That's where the boots came from.
No, that was from I created my own ceremony.
Yeah, that was the
like
that was the one
ceremony.
From the world. Yeah, the winter religion thing where from the Japanese tradition where they thank all of the broken pins and everything. She had thanked her boots.
Okay, all right. But yeah, I mean, like, in the moment, an anathema ritual will, like, really kind of, like, it's such a hard break, right? And especially after you do, like, the first one, like, the first anathema ritual is always such a big deal, right? Because you're doing something very, like, taboo, right? But once you do, like, one, it's kind of like the first time you get into a fist fight and get your ass beat and you realize it's not the end of the world. Like, you do an anathema ritual, you realize that, like, your world is not going to come crashing down because you did this thing that defiled a belief that you held, and then they just get easier and easier, right?
Oh, I was gonna say like one anathema ritual that I've offered to other people who are coming out of like a traditionalist Christian background. Like Anton LaVey did a really good job with writing up the Black Mass.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, mine was way more simple than that. The first anathema ritual I ever did was basically a formal renunciation of the like saving grace of God.
Mm-hmm.
Where basically I was standing out somewhere and it wasn't like this grand ceremony, but it was basically I just sat down and I was like, I renounce the Father, I renounce the Son, I renounce the Holy Spirit. And that was it, right?
Yep.
Because the thing is, in, you know, especially in like certain sects of Christianity, if you renounce the Holy Spirit, that's an unforgivable sin. Like you can't come back from that.
Yep.
Right? But you do that and you realize it's not the end of the fucking world. And, like, your life just kind of keeps going on like normal. And then you realize, okay, well, what else am I holding on to that doesn't really fucking mean anything?
Right.
You know? So those are things where, like, little rituals like that, again, in my opinion, have a cumulative effect. Where the more you do them, the easier they become. And thus, the easier it becomes for you to shift your paradigm.
Mm-hmm. And, like, the more you do it, like, as you had said, when you're coming into a new paradigm, you're coming into it fresh and new, and you don't know as much as you would like, and all of that, and you're learning more, and you're doing more things, and the more you paradigm shift, the more you can, when you're done with said paradigm, you can just reset your mind back to before you started practicing it, where it was just like, yeah, it was just as new and whatever as when I first came into it, so it doesn't really matter. So, next!
Yeah. There's also, I think there's something to be said about retaining things that you learn, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, one of the things that I really, like, retained from the last paradigm that I just shifted out of was the folk magic aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never really been that big on folk magic until I started working, like conjure. I started working hoodoo, and then this paradigm that I was doing, had a lot of those elements that had basically been like lifted and baked into it. Those were the things that I really liked from working it. But like, the coming out of this specific like anti-cosmic paradigm was like, okay, these are the techniques that I like. How do I work them independent of this paradigm?
Yeah, and right? Then like how can you work them into the next one you're going to do?
Yeah, and it gave me something to look for in the next thing that I want to start working with, you know. And it's kind of a nebulous idea of like, you know, I don't necessarily know like, oh, I want to go into doing this. I want to go into doing that. Like, but I know like, okay, the folk magic aesthetic is like really, like I'm really attaching on to that right now. So I want to like look for inspiration there, you know? Mm-hmm. And I think that over time, what you'll realize shifting through a bunch of different practices, or at least like, you know, browsing, is that you will learn the things that you like aesthetically, and you will learn how to pick out like, oh, that's something that I could use for, you know, inspiration. It's almost like creating a fucking idea board, but like actually useful.
Right, and like it doesn't have to be like a set of techniques or anything. It could be like purely an aesthetic thing. So, for example, one of the things that I've carried on since my working with voodoo and everything is prior to doing that, an altar for me was like a sacred space. It was something where like all of your tools were laid out and everything was neat and tidy, and it was all like, these are the tools I'm going to use and I need to put them back in the right place, and it needs to be like, you know, pretty and everything. But then working with hoodoo and voodoo, it was like the altar was a living thing. It was something where you worked with constantly. Like it was a mess. It was just a heap of garbage on a table. But it was a heap of garbage that like had all of this meaning, had all of this use, and you were constantly using it and everything. And so it had a much more like, to me, an altar look, I guess. So like if anyone's been into like a voodoo shop or something, like most of the times they'll have an altar there where it's just like piles of beads and coins and like everything's dripped in wax and like there's shit burning on it that should probably be on fire, but it's not.
Well, and there's I think that with an altar, especially in like voodoo and in conjure in general, the idea is that you work with your altar constantly, right?
Yep.
And the altar is more about creating a space. In conjure or folk magic or whatever, the altar is more akin to like a magical circle than it is a physical space.
Yeah.
Right? So you work with it constantly, and by constantly working with it, you care about it a lot more, and that will facilitate you cleaning and taking care of your altar. But like, yes, your altar will always have it'll look used.
Yeah.
It will look as though it's not a decorative fucking like Instagram witch altar. There's actually some shit going on. There's like fucking veves that are fucking drawn on there. There's like goddamn like offerings all over it. The candles are constantly like nubs. All of that shit. Like, there's fucking cigars that are just, like, put out on the altar. There's, like, booze. Like, it should look like that in voodoo and in conjure.
Right, and that was one thing that I picked up from it, and I've kept going, is, just, you use the altar all the time. It is a focal point, instead of, something tucked to the side where it's like, okay, it's magic time, I need to whip the altar out. Rather, it's in a prominent place in your house because you're constantly working with it. And so you're constantly going to pass by it. You've got your images to deities and whatever, so you'll walk by in the morning like, hey man, how's it going? Here's a new bowl of water. You'll light the candles and be like, okay, we're off to a good day. Have a good one, as opposed to like, well, everything's done now and it needs to be put in the exact place and it needs to be all dusted off and put away, and we're not going to look at it again until it's magic time.
Yeah, and that's like a thing that I've kind of lost a little bit, is because like, so there in our house we have cats, and one of them is very small, and she likes to just wreck shit all the time. And like, so I don't know if you saw the like chaos altar that we made.
Yeah.
Like that one doesn't get used as much because the cats will fucking wreck it, right?
Right.
So what I've done is I also have a corner desk, right? And my corner desk, I only use the long side of it for all of my like PC stuff. So the short side has just become my like working altar.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's where I set up. It's like, it's wood, so I can draw stuff on it and then like wipe it off with a sponge or whatever. I've got candles, I've got stuff like that I can just use to make my shit right.
Well, speaking of cats and altars, my altar's in front of a window facing south, and I've literally given up a certain space of my altar for one of the cats who just likes to sit and look out the window there. So she now is kind of part of the altar. I didn't have any other choice in the matter.
See, what I did, I have the cats that knock shit over all the time too, but I prevented the cats from jumping up on there by lining the edges of it in tinfoil. And the first time they fucking jumped on that shit, they wigged the fuck out, and they stayed off of it forever.
So the problem is not that the kitten goes up there and like purposefully knocks shit over. She's just a fucking big old klutz. Like, she just is like the clumsiest cat ever. She just knocks shit over. Like,
yeah,
she's not aware. She's in that weird state where she's not aware of how big she is. She still thinks that she's tiny, but she's not. So she just like jumps up on shit, like shit goes fucking flying, and then she acts real surprised about it. But like, my solution has just been like, okay, here's a fucking altar space that's like dope and here and usable. And it's, again, because I spend a lot of time in my office, like, it's just a natural place to have one.
Right.
So one of the things that I wanted to also bring up is, especially starting out, one of the things that helped me a lot with paradigm shifting was just doing it arbitrarily. Not necessarily that like picking something arbitrarily, but like picking, okay, so there's an exercise that Carol kind of describes where you roll a d6 and based on that, it changes like, but like not necessarily picking a a time to switch arbitrarily, but like when I'm getting bored with something and I feel like, when you're bored, you're not inspired anymore and you want to just move on to the next thing, just arbitrarily pick a new thing, like, and figure out like, okay, this is what works for me here. This is what doesn't work for me here. That's kind of what the Tantra thing was for me, was like, I just picked Tantra. We were talking about it, so it wasn't like completely arbitrary, but I was like, 30 days. Let's see what happens,
Right.
And I did, like, I went through the 30 days. I fucking hated it. It's so like, there's so many like counterintuitive, like, oh, you're getting in touch with the like individual non-dualistic divine, but here's the like mandalas that everybody uses and you have to use. Like, no, I'm just gonna make a fucking sigil. I don't care.
Right.
Like, it was still a learning process. I think those things are kind of important to do. So yeah, I feel like being arbitrary, especially at first, is going to get you into the habit of being able to just swap.
Okay, this kind of leads me to a few thoughts. Okay, first of all, like earlier, like it seems to me like, okay, when you're paradigm shifting, there's kind of like two functions of it. One is the practice of letting go of previous things and moving on to something new. And the other is kind of the opposite of that, where you kind of, it's a cumulative effect of things that you learn and you might continue to carry forward in your practice. Is what I'm hearing you guys discussing. I guess my question with the paradigm shifting is, how important do you think it is, like, if you're shifting from one to another, like, to do it like 100%? Or like, cause you're talking about sometimes I figured this out while doing this particular paradigm. I'm going to continue with that sort of practice or idea.
Okay.
But at other times, you're like, well, I gotta get rid of it. I'm going 100% into something. And, with my experience, the past year being a podcast, obviously I'm just like kind of each month doing something a little different, but I'm not really diving headfirst into like a full acceptance of the paradigm. And where do you think those different types of shifting, play a role? Do you think everybody should try to do something like 100% and really be into one paradigm? Or do you think it's okay for people to mostly just semi-shift and use the tools they think work?
Which is a really good question. And part of the, like, with this podcast, what we're wanting to do is, like, kind of, or how we discuss a different paradigm and a different practice, like, each month. It's kind of like the semi-shifting sort of thing. But I do very much believe that, like, going full bore into something very much has its merits. Because by doing so, you force your brain in order to reconcile with other things, that are incorporated in that paradigm. And so, like, it's a mental exercise of, like, you can't, if you go, like, okay, for example, with the Tantra, if something, like, goes a different way, you can't really explain that away as, like, well, I had done this ritual wrong or some shit. Rather, you're forcing your brain to reconcile the fact of the non-duality and everything. So, like, there's a mental exercise in that aspect. But overall, like, it's choosing what you're more comfortable in doing. So, like, myself, I just go the 100% into things. Because I've been, through the years, just picking at individual things for a very long time anyway. So, like, I have, the experience of knowing, like, okay, these are different practices and different things. And so, for me, on my own path, it makes sense more for me to just go headlong into a paradigm. Because my own practice has been developed enough where I know what I can incorporate and what I can't, and what are more appropriate for different situations and whatever. But that's not for everyone. Like, if you don't want to, okay, so take for example, like mystical Judaism, or like, Hasidism. like, sure, you can go full bore into it. You can start practicing kosher. You can start, practicing all of the laws that are laid out in the Torah and everything. If that's what you want to do, if that's going to make your practice better, sure. Me? No, that wouldn't do anything. That'd just piss me off. Like, I would be spending more time nitpicking the tiny rules and kind of like with how in Jewish culture there are kind of like roundabouts to the rules anyway. So like you can't use starting or pressing buttons or anything. You can't do that. You can't start a fire, which is where it stemmed from, but you can't use an elevator on the Sabbath. And so in order to get around that, they created the Paternoster, which is just a constantly revolving elevator. So they're not doing anything. It's just constantly going, and you're going to use that. Or there's, I forget the name of it in, I think it's Manhattan. They have the, that string that goes around several city blocks. And because in the Torah, it says basically you can't perform any sort of action that is not in your backyard, which is extremely paraphrased. But if you can't do anything in your backyard, so they circumvented that law by just creating this string around all of these city blocks. So yeah, technically this is all our backyard because the string delegates it now. So my time would be spent looking like for workarounds for all of these laws and rules and everything rather than actual practice. If I were to go into Hasidic Judaism, I would be looking for roundabouts rather than actual practice. So that one, I'm not going to go 100% in.
I think it's also worth mentioning that there are certain paradigms like voodoo where you, by definition, cannot be 100% into it unless you are initiated into it. So some of those things, like just by definition, and it's not that you can't be, you could go do that, right? Like you could go find a Hugan and be initiated over the course of, several years and become that if you wanted to. Right. But for the purposes of learning about how a paradigm works, at least on a certain level, like you don't necessarily need to do that, right? And there are things like as not being initiated into that culture that you're not going to learn. You just aren't, So I don't think that it's necessary to be able to do that all the time. I would definitely encourage people to find something to dive all the way in on because it's an experience, right? And like, I can't tell you how to practice your magic. I can't tell you how to do something, which it extends to, I can't tell you to dive all the way in on a paradigm. Like, you have to experience that and decide whether you like to do it or not. There's a book written by Josh Wetzel called The Paradigmal Pirate. And in that book, he describes both different forms of paradigm shifting between just kind of like perusing through something and figuring out, the little bits of something versus diving all the way in and like learning the deep, dark secrets of something. And like the advantages for both are laid out. It's a good read, but like, again, I can't make those decisions for you.
They both have their own merits. They have their own merits, they have their own drawbacks, and it's up to you to decide. It's like, say you're buying a fucking new car, right? You have to look into the merits and the downsides of each one. Like, well, this car, the maintenance is going to be easy because, like, I opened up the hood and it's, if a light blows out, I don't have to disassemble the entire fucking manifold in order to get to it. Whereas this one over here has more room in it for me to, like, carry things that I actually need for my job that this other one didn't have. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons of the practice in order to figure out, like, whether or not you just want to, like, take the techniques or just go hard into it because they both have merits to it.
And then I would wrap up my thoughts just by saying that, like, that is a decision that should be made on a case-by-case basis, depending on what paradigm you're looking at. Like, there have been times when I've just, like, read a few books on a subject, found a couple things that were, like, useful to me, and then stuck with them. There have been times where I've, dove all the way into something.
But I would say, though, that for those new to practicing magic, I wouldn't go full bore into something. Because if you're already leaving, like, a dogmatic system where they're telling you what the absolute truth is, and you just go, like, hard into something new, you're more than likely just going to be, well, this one has the absolute truth now, and then now you're just stuck in another dogmatic system.
Hmm.
Also, consider the fact that, like, if you are coming out of a strictly dogmatic system, you've basically been 100% full bore into a paradigm for that entire time up to when you decide to leave it.
Right, and so, like, it would be detrimental for you to just, so, switching from, say, Roman Catholicism, where you fucking go to Mass every Sunday, and you carry around your rosary beads, and you're saying all of your prayers, and all of this shit, and it has all of the answers provided for you, and then you decide, well, I'm going to finally, like, dip my toes into magic, and start working with this other paradigm, and then you go, you do an anathema ritual, and manage to, shed off all of those years of dogmatic teaching with Roman Catholicism, and then you move over here and, like, start practicing Hinduism, and now, okay, well, now I'm swearing off meat, and now I'm, like, I can't, like, I'm going to figure out what caste system I belong to, and this has all of the answers now, and I'm stuck in this one. You're just kind of trading things, unless you kind of get that practice down of, being able to, like Dreadnought said, just arbitrarily switching, until you can get that mentality of just being able to quickly shed off a paradigm and be like, no, it's all of this is bullshit and we don't know what life means. Until you can actually start doing that, I would not suggest going very hard into it, but I'm not your dad. So yeah, hope that answers your question.
No, I just figured that might be helpful for some listeners, since...
No, yeah. that was a really good question.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like the next thing that I kind of want to move on to is going to help with that discussion a little more, because I want to kind of move now into talking about, like, experiences with paradigm shifting. Yara, I know you have one that is being documented. Before we get into that, Cologne, I'm interested, do you have anything that you would consider to be, like, a major paradigm shift? Or if, like, how would you say your experience has been with, like, kind of doing these constant little mini shifts throughout your time on the podcast?
Yeah, I don't think I've done any really major paradigm shifting. I haven't decided to go really deep into any particular paradigm yet. Yeah, I feel like I'm still in this state of just kind of learning a bunch of different tools. And also, to a certain extent, almost like learning the language for magic, the language for how I would, start explaining my understanding of, like, the divine or spiritual or the structure of the universe or what magic is and stuff, that just taking in a lot of different and new information in order to make, my understanding of that clearer for myself. And I think that's what, like, doing the different paradigm shifting each month, or, reading on something new each month is doing for me. It's doing more of that accumulative effect that I mentioned earlier of, just adding to my general knowledge and understanding.
Right on. Yeah, and I think that, like, again, between, like, a full paradigm shift and then, like, I genuinely don't think that there is such a thing as a 100% complete, like a clean shit that you don't even have to wipe after paradigm shift. Like, you have things that you hold on to and like practices that inform your general practice as a magician, right? And that is something that is shared with like eclectic witchcraft. The thing that is not held on to are the beliefs. Like you ditch the beliefs basically. And maybe you don't all the time, but like you want to be able to do that, right? That is how you kind of get past the symbolism and get to what the symbols represent.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying about like the language aspect, where just literally learning new words for concepts you didn't even know really existed before, literally makes those ideas more concrete in your head, and that's, I think, part of, reading and learning about these different paradigms are helping expand my vocabulary on these issues and therefore also expand my ability to conceptualize these ideas and apply them.
Okay, so Yara, I know that you have recently undergone a pretty major paradigm shift, and you're actually running a new sister show about it. I'm interested to hear about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm transferring into a paradigm that I've decided to call administrism. And I'm calling it that because, and I will be the first to admit, it's not a new thing. It's basically just rebranded neo-shamanism. So no one's going to say like, oh, administrism's not new. It's just all of this shit that fucking Mercy Eliade talked about. Fuck you, I know it is. It gets... You fucking dumbass, I know what I'm doing. Like, it's just rebranded neo-shamanism. But the reason why I'm calling it administrism is because, like the word appropriation we had mentioned earlier, the term shaman or neo-shaman is very fucking loaded, and I hate that word. I really hate that word. And a lot of other people do, and a lot of people who are interested, which I've come across, other people are interested in practicing neo-shamanism or shamanism, or the practices of indigenous cultures, but they're afraid of taking on the term shamanism or practicing those because of the loaded terminology. And so this is me giving you like, hey, you can still do it. It's called administrism now. You don't have to like, oh, what kind of spiritual practice do you do with administrism? Okay, what's that? And then you can further extrapolate on that rather than saying, oh, neo-shamanism. And you're like, oh, so you're a wook? So, like...
Neo-shamanism. No, I don't want to buy your book.
Right, yeah. So basically what neo-shamanism is, so the last practice, which I'd mentioned before, the last paradigm that I was involved in was Qliphothic death worship, and so anti-cosmic Satanism. And I got bored with it, doing the same thing every...
Well, I mean, you'd also done that. You'd done that for like fucking 3 years or some change, right?
Uh-huh. And so I got bored with it. And there were also, like, for a very long time, the universe and all of these synchronicities have been pointing to me, like, you need to do this neo-shamanism thing. You need to do this shamanism thing. You need to practice this. I'm like, no, that's a loaded word, and I don't like it, and it's stupid, and I don't want to do it. So I'm going to switch over from Gnosticism, and I'm going to do anti-cosmic Satanism.
And fuck Sethian Gnosticism. We gotta go darker.
Right? Yeah. It's like magically acceptable edgelordism. So,
and even then, like, so current 218 is barely magically acceptable.
Barely, yeah.
Like, it is very fringe.
Yeah. But I did that, and so, like, I'd been having the universe prod me for a very long time, just telling me, like, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this. And based on my experience with other people, like, coming to me for help, and, like, seeing... And so the reason I chose the term administrism was because it's someone who administers. So they administer entheogens, they administer advice, they administer wisdom, they administer their knowledge, they administer healing, all of these things. Like, they give this to other people. But at the same time, it also kind of has that root word of, like, administration, where it implies, like, like a kind of hierarchy where it's like I actually work in this all the time and I've been doing this, and so that you can have people who aren't practitioners come to you and, you know, you're an administrator of the spirit world and it's like, I have a connection to this and I can help you out as best I can. So I kind of stuck with that term, and so basically all it is just, it's first and foremost like getting in touch with the land and the environment around you, understanding like the genius loci and understanding the spirit of everything around you, and, you know, how all life is intertwined. So like, for example, so I live out in the country and there's a shitload of spiders, right? And my wife hates spiders. And so, but understanding like, well, why are there a bunch of spiders? Well, it's because we live out in the country and there are bean and cornfields, and like there are a lot of bugs that live in those, and so the spiders eat the bugs. And so there are a lot of spiders because it provides a food source for all of the bugs. Well, how do we get rid of the spiders because they get in on our business? Well, what you want to do is you attract birds. Birds eat spiders. So if you want to help that problem, you need to understand like the intricacies of life and how like everything is kind of involved in this web thing. So if you want more birds, then you have to have bird attractors. And so like do things to like bring more birds. So like have bird feeders. Like have like throw out offerings to the birds, which my wife has done. Like she's laid out like this little tray where she makes like snacks for the birds, where she'll put like peanut butter and seeds and like all of this shit, and she'll send it out there.
Gather yourself a crow army.
Yes! Yes! Yeah, and so like you want fewer spiders, you attract a crow army, and the crow army will wage war in the backside in the great fucking crow spider battle that will take place on these 2 acres. But so like so I'm like,
but it's
I'm focusing on the land itself, and like part of that and understanding the intricacies of life and everything, it's also understanding from like a healing aspect, like everything that's part of you is also like you have to treat any illness or problem that you have holistically. So like a big thing with like Western medicine is that it treats the symptoms. It doesn't always treat like the root of the problem. So like, oh well,
yes.
What's causing your problems with sleep? So like I have a very poor sleep problem. Well, here's some pills to help you sleep. Well, that doesn't get rid of the problem. Like I don't really need to do that. Well, here instead it focuses on like, well, you should, you know, have a better diet, you should exercise, you should like have a like sleep hygiene and shit. You need to start working on meditation and shit so that way you're focusing, like getting rid of stress and all of these things that like keep your mind racing during the day, taking better care of yourself. And so like treating health and everything holistically. And part of that also, and like the integration with the land and everything, is like getting as much of your sustenance from the land as possible. So like, you know, we're doing like homesteading and focusing on like a garden and, you know, making what we can with the earth we have and the land that we're on. So like that's been my transition. And like because we moved to this place like I think 8 or 9 months ago, and since then like we've been focused mainly on the house itself, not so much on the land. So for the last since I had transitioned into this paradigm, like I've been focusing more on the land and like going out there every day and doing yoga, meditating on the land, spending time amongst it, like going on walks, walking around all of these trees and whatever, just spending time with the land itself and understanding, like hearing it speak to me, hearing it do all of these things and focusing on all of that and how I can help it and make this land thrive as much as I want to as well, because unless this land thrives, I don't. So
yeah, it's and like I was gonna bring up, you know, like the kind of holistic idea. Speaking of more loaded language.
Oh fuck!
Right?
I hate that word, but like that's the fucking definition. But
like so it you know, specifically to the you know, the problem of having too many spiders. Like that is a very holistic way of looking at it, of like, how do I solve this problem using the tools that like nature has given to me, right?
Right.
This isn't like I'm going to go out, because I remember in your last paradigm, like, so with 218, one of the most holy herbs in that is tobacco.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And I remember you had talked at one point about using tobacco to make a pesticide.
Yes, which I did do that. Yep.
Yeah. But that is, it's a solution. It gets the same result. There's less spiders. But like what you're doing with using a pesticide like that, whether it's chemical or, whether it's like something you bought from fucking Monsanto or Major or whatever the fuck, right?
Which don't
It's
do
not
that.
holistic.
Don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. But what I'm saying is like, by using that solution, you are just eliminating that from the natural order of like, the natural cycle of things. Whereas if you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do things to bring birds to my property that will continue the cycle and like how things occur naturally, like you aren't disrupting.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's much more about finding your place in this cycle and not being like, well, hey, guess what? I'm a Bogart this whole motherfucking thing. Like,
Yeah, right, because like even using a pesticide like tobacco, you're using that, and like I still have the thing of it, and I plan on using it to some degree with the gardening and everything to keep away like, pests, because there are some pests that don't have a natural predator that will feed on these things. And so in order to, prevent that from happening, you can use tobacco, which is natural to the, like, it's endemic to the area that I live in. So I can use nicotinoids in order to, help prevent that. I'll still spray it on the plants, but I'm not going to use it as like spraying it on every spider I see and like spraying it on like all of my windows and my doorstops and everything, because that is like, I see it as, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain, like, as opposed to seeing everything as like a web, everything is like intertwined and everything, using a pesticide is just like, it's a full stop, rather than coming around and being, adding to the web and the intricacies of how everything is involved with itself.
Yeah, you are now just taking that out of the equation. And, the argument, the thing that I kind of see or envision as, putting it on your doorstops and putting it all over is you are willfully doing something to take your house out of that web.
Right, yeah.
Which,
and don't get me wrong, like spiders are good for the place too. Like they'll take care of the like other harmful insects. They'll kill those. It's just my thing is I don't want them crawling on my face when I'm trying to sleep.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I understand that. So, like, what else is going on with Administrism? I know it's pretty new.
Yeah, so we've got one podcast episode out in which we talked about, like, what we're wanting to evolve from it. And, we'll be recording the next one either, as of today's recording, either tomorrow or the day after, where it's been a couple weeks since we first started doing this, and so what we've developed since then and how we've been developing. On the 20th of March, I had a big initiatory ritual for myself that involved me shedding the old and starting with the new. And I'd already done sort of an anathema ritual where I closed out the old paradigm. Because one of the tenets of Administrism is that almost all ritual must involve a fire, because fire is intrinsic to the human experience. Yeah. And so, like, all I did for closing it out was, like, I had the altar to Cain and everything, and it was on an old wooden, like, chest. And so what I did was I went out to a fire, and my wife and I were drumming, and the entire time we went into a trance state kind of with drumming, and basically thanked Cain for everything that he had done for us, but it's time for us to move on. And so, like, as the drumming continued, I slowly put each piece that belonged to his altar into this box, and then I took this flag that was intrinsic to the starting of the paradigm. I had taken this flag and I had draped it over the box and then went and took it to my garage and set it aside in its own corner, and it was closed. And it was after that, like, I had received this crazy dream involving death where I take that as kind of a blessing.
Like sending
yeah,
off.
like a blessing. Like, he was basically saying, like, yeah, no, it's cool. You have my blessing to continue moving on. And I distinctly remember him asking me asking him to the effect, like, well, is there any in the dream I remember distinctly I had asked him, is there any way that I can call you immediately? Like, is there any sigil or mantra that I can say that will call you back? And his response was basically to the effect of, no, because I am a universal concept. It's going to take actual work to get me back. But you're always welcome to call back on me again. It's just going to take work on your behalf. So that's fine. So I basically got his blessing to continue with what I'm doing, and on the 20th, which was the vernal equinox, I had partaken in a ritual with a few other people that involved, like, my initiation and birth into this new paradigm. And so since then, like, that's what I've been doing. I've been working a lot with the land. I've been, like, going out and doing yoga in it. I've been, like, every day I've been meditating out there. And it's come on fucking strong. It is come on.
Well, I
strong.
mean, it sounds like something you're so deeply personally invested in, and, like, borrowing from, like, what, like, neo-shamanism or shamanism in general is, I'd imagine it extends to administrism too, that it is so highly experiential.
Yes. It is, very much so. But, like, with me saying it's strong, like, one of the first days that after being initiated and everything, like, I went out there in order to just start meditating and whatever, and, like, normally when I meditate, I put on some, like, pretty chill background music and shit.
Yeah.
I was just out there, and, like, sensory-wise, while I was meditating, like, it immediately felt like this music was too overbearing. Just listen to the land. Stop, turn this off, just listen around you. Like, there's music around you if you just tune in and listen to it.
Yeah.
And so it was like, okay, cool, done, shut that off, and, like, I started becoming more involved with the land that I'm on and everything. So, yeah, that's been my experience transitioning recently into a new paradigm.
That's really cool. Do you have any, like, big experiences prior? I know, like, because you do a lot of, like 100%, like, you're all in.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Do you think that those other experiences have informed how you perceive essentially branding your own paradigm?
They have, in the sense that, like, I see it's common, it's mentioned, like, by, who I said, like, Mircea Eliade. He had mentioned that common in quote-unquote shamanistic societies, there's always an initiatory ritual or an initiatory process, which is not only common within those paradigms. Like, it's common in within Western practices as well. Like, you have the initiation of, even modernly, from someone into a priest. Like, there's a whole initiatory process for someone to become a like, Catholic priest. You go to seminary and all of this shit.
There's a whole goddamn book about it. There's an entire Bible DLC you have to read. It's fucking dumb.
Yeah, but not only that, you can go back to the, like, Western mystery traditions, where there was still an initiation process there. There was an initiation process in, like, Hermeticism. There was an initiation process in ancient Egypt. Like, there's always an initiatory process. And so, like, what I have picked up from my own paradigm shifting is I always go through a ritual in which I initiate myself into the new paradigm. I don't necessarily always do an anathema ritual, because, like, I didn't work for, like, voodoo or Gnosticism, or, like, when I practiced Asatru, I didn't necessarily do an anathema ritual then, but I've always picked up the initiatory thing. Like, I always initiate myself into the new thing. There's always a big ritual that I have when I switch into a new paradigm, because that's basically telling my mind, like, all right, shit's changing, this is big, you need to go into this differently.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I'm real interested in kind of tracking along with how this works for you. It seems very like, I don't know. It seems like a very like, not that you haven't been like not that you've not been invested in other like Magic that you've done, but this seems like something that you are even like. It's going to kind of dwarf that investment because this is something that is, again, so personal.
Right.
It's about your land. It's about your experience. It's about all of these things that, like, you are assigning.
Yeah.
Right?
But at the same time, like, it has that individualist aspect, but there's very much, like, the anti-individualism of realizing that you're part of a web. That you're part of a greater thing. And, like, that's...
Yeah, but
Well, I was just going to say that's kind of what I'm trying to do with like documenting it and everything, just letting listeners and other people understand like you can become part of this web too. Like you just have to like accept it and like step into it and realize your part in the web instead of, like, oh, I'm a shaman now. No, you're not. You're not an indigenous person. Well,
yeah, no,
I think I am. Well, now you're one of the thing that the Lakota people had said white people can't join us on our spirit visions. You're the reason for that. So,
yeah, and it's again like there is that collective aspect to it, but you have to start with like an individual analysis.
Yes. And like I had said, like the universe for a very long time has kind of been pushing me into this direction. Like you have to do this. You should do this. And like even long before when we had that episode where we talked about like our magical names and everything, me picking Yaramarud, that still has a like a foot in that door where like I'm helping other people, like I'm helping instruct other people, I'm showing other people things. Like it very much has that aspect. So like for a very long time the universe has kind of been pushing me into this direction.
But yeah, I think that, like, there's, and again, that comes back to, like, being able to view your life in terms of synchronicity, like, you will start to understand the directions that you should be going in,
Right, and, like, I think it's especially useful in, like, current times, because, especially, like, current political times, where, because... recently we had gone to, or my wife and I had gone to a birthday party from some of our friends who were Congolese. And we were talking to them about like aspects of community and like personal freedoms and shit like that. And they were talking about how with the pandemic and everything, how even fucking wearing a mask has turned into a political thing where it's like, it's my personal freedom to not do this. Well, I mean, sure it is, but how about giving a shit about your community and like caring about people around you? Like, sure, I'm willing to limit my freedom to not wear a mask in order to make sure someone doesn't die. In the same way that I'm willing to wear pants so that people don't see my dick when I walk into the store. But did you have anything that you wanted to add about your own experience transitioning paradigms?
Oh, right. So I am also, like, I was working that same 218 current. I wasn't doing it for nearly as long. I was doing it for about a year or so. And it was kind of the same thing. What I realized with it is that what had started out as feeling very empowering to my magic was starting to feel very limiting of like, well, you have to do things on this night at this time specifically, which meant like staying my ass up late to do shit.
Yep.
You can only do these certain things. You have to do X, Y, and Z in order to unlock these keys and, whatever. Which is, like, really nice to, like, learn how to dedicate yourself to a practice. But at a certain point when it becomes like, well, I can't do this working because I need these ingredients to do it.
Right.
Like, that's now just limiting your practice, right? And that's fucking dumb. So, like, that to me is where I started, like, it started feeling like a chore to have to do this. And, I stuck with it for like a year and a little bit over a year, so it wasn't like pick it up, try it out, put it down 2 minutes later kind of, scenario. But when it felt like that and I realized like, okay, this is burning me out of magic right now. Like, I just knew it was time to change, and I was just like, you know, I've gotten the things that I think I'm going to get out of this philosophically and materially, and I think it's time to move on. I haven't really done any kind of like big ritual to close it out. I have one in mind that I'm going to do, which is not all that dissimilar from yours.
And you've kind of been looking into the Gnosticism, right?
Sort of. It's again one of those things where after reading a bunch more on it, it's more of kind of like a philosophy thing.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really affect my practice that much. Like, it's interesting philosophically, but like, you know, and part of that is, you know, colored by the fact that I've done a lot of my like magical philosophy is based off of Hermetic principles.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the stuff with Tantra and the stuff with Gnosticism is like, I'm just realizing like, oh, this is like all the same shit. It's just using different language.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's all about realizing your part in a collective. It's all about realizing the like non-dualistic nature of reality. It's all about figuring out like, you know, unlocking your true potential as the God man, as the God woman, as the like, you know, transcendental divine.
Yeah.
Right. It's just using different language, which is cool, which is like, you know, all fine and all good, and all something that I'm not super interested in right now. Like, I'm set philosophically.
And then before like 218, you had sort of kind of worked with me with voodoo.
Yes.
And before that, it was basically just like rando rituals, right? Like, you hadn't really gone full into like a paradigm.
I was doing a lot of stuff with Zen Buddhism.
Oh yeah, that's
but
right. Yeah.
That again, the only real practice with Zen is just meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just Zazen meditation. There's not like, it's not like Tibetan Buddhism where there's a bunch of different stuff that you do.
Mm-hmm.
Like, with Zen, literally all you do is you sit down, you meditate, and you stare at a wall. Like, Zazen, the closest translation to English there is for it is wall gazing. So it's not real, like, it's a paradigm, absolutely. But it's not like a very magically intensive one.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like a lot of it, and when I say like I'm set philosophically, I don't mean like I have all the answers to everything. It's that like, I don't know that I could like ingest something right now that is very like philosophically heavy.
Like, kind of like that you've already gotten everything out of it that you feel you need.
I feel like my practice right now is philosophically overloaded.
Fair enough.
Because like Zen meditation is all about like, you're not doing anything. You're just sitting there and experiencing. Voodoo is very petition heavy. You're not necessarily doing a lot of like, there's practical stuff to the conjure part of it, but like the invocation aspect of it is you invoke, you know, whichever Loa that you're trying to work with. You hope you get the right one, and you just ask them for things.
Yeah.
And then like you make a deal. It's very similar to like goetic evocation.
Right.
You know? From there I transitioned into 218, which 218 kind of blends those things. It's very like, there are some parts of it that seem very like, to go back to you know, the conversation about appropriation. There is a lot of stuff in 218 that is just lifted from traditional like
Santa Muerte. Yeah.
Yeah. And like SLM cults in Argentina and shit like that. And they even, you know, they acknowledge that in the first book. But by the time I got to the third book and they were talking about like, literally they were talking about these different Veves and how to like activate them. And I was literally like, this is just Haitian voodoo.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
This is Haitian voodoo that has been fucking lifted and appropriated. That's when I was like, really like, I'm out.
Yeah. Although I will say that they did have pretty dope sigils for shit.
Yeah.
And
oh yeah, for sure. I'm not saying like,
I did like one aspect that like it kind of moved me into with administrism is because you remember with 218 how it had basically like each plant that was under Cain's whatever had its own spirit, had its own whatever. But, like, that kind of moved me into, like, when, with my studying for administrism and indigenous practices, that's a very common motif in cultures across the world, is that, like, different plants have their own songs. Like, they'll teach you songs, they'll teach you, like, how, you know, they've learned what they did, and, like, that's how, like, within Central and Southern America, how they had developed, like, ayahuasca, where it's orally activated DMT. Like, they would have asked the shamans, how did you figure this out? And their response was almost always, the plants told us.
Yeah. And I guess I should clarify, it wasn't that I was out and like, oh, this is too, like, it wasn't necessarily a judgment call. What I realized is, like, this is stuff that I've already done, and it's stuff I can do without all the restriction.
Right, yeah.
Like, and so at that point I was like, and again, like, you know, I was like, okay, I'm just kind of, I feel like I've gotten everything I need from this. I'm gonna move on. And I haven't really landed on, you know, practice-wise, I have kind of a general idea of, like, okay, I want to do stuff that's more folk magic intensive. I'm very interested in, like, lines of communication, and I don't mean that in the sense of, like, mundane, but, like, magical communication. So,
and
I haven't.
Well, I was gonna say, like, with how you're kind of in an in between right now, I think I'd like to mention that, like, with paradigm shifting, you don't necessarily want to just, like, okay, well, I'm done with this paradigm, I'm done doing everything, and then stop your magical practice.
Yeah.
Like, you'll still keep doing the things that you've learned. You'll still keep doing shit like divination. You'll still keep doing meditation. You'll still keep doing, like, sigil work and shit like that. It's just until you get this, you know, aesthetic system that you want to work with. If you want to work with a particular system or learn from that system, like, you're still doing shit in the interim.
Yeah, and, like, that's where, you know, having a good base practice falls back. Like, I have a base practice that's founded on meditation and sigils, and divination. Like, those kind of three things create, like, what would be my day-to-day practice, right? So there's, you know, there's things I'm interested in. I've been more interested in kind of, like, again, talking about kind of, like, lines of communication. So it's interesting you had brought up, like, the genius loci, right? I'm interested in finding, like, a genius loci for, like, the American highway system.
Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Like, yeah, but stuff like that. You know, whatever. Eisenhower was the guy that did it. I don't think he was the guy that said do it. He didn't even do it.
One of the interesting things. Well, one of the interesting things, especially with the building of roads. So I had learned this oddly enough in my anthropology studies. Like, the reason why, like, you'll be driving down some roads, right, and you're in the middle of nowhere. Like, there are no trees or anything, but then all of a sudden it makes a curve to the left and then back to where it was. The reason why is historically, like, that was where a road was just built because there was probably something in the way.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, it's super interesting how, the road system was always based on necessity. Like, we have and it just became this fundamental thing. Like, yeah, this road is paved according to this curve that for some reason there was a log that had fallen down, like, 250 years ago. And now we're just traveling around this non-existent log.
Yeah. There's something there. I haven't really, like, you know, I'm just, everything right now is super nebulous for me. But yeah, that's basically where I'm at, you know, is just, like, it's an in-between thing. And in those times, you really just kind of fall back to what is your core practice?
Right.
You know? Yeah, that's pretty much what I've got.
We'd like to take this time to acknowledge our partnership with our sponsor, Welcome to Terradice. Not only do they carry occult and ritual items that have been personally vetted and created by practicing occultists, they've partnered up with the Faithblind Council to provide you with exclusive offerings from your hosts. Tarot consultations by Dreadnought, hand-carved leather by Cologne, and custom talismans from Yaramarud are just a few of the items sold by Welcome to Terradice in their collection of occult artists. If you're a magical artist looking for a place to showcase your goods, why not join the Terradice team? Whether it's to sell your work or to add another piece to your collection, please visit our sponsors at welcometoterradise.com. The Faith Blind Council would like to give a big shout out to the Folk Magic Society. Based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, this group explores how people do magic around the world, including spells, divination, dolls, talismans, astrology, and more. Normally meeting at Mage's Books at 1848 Central Avenue on the second Saturday each month, they've recently expanded their presence by hosting online discussions. The host, Dave, is an archaeologist who shares a wealth of knowledge on the history of magic and spiritual practices. To learn more and join in an upcoming event, look for the Folk Magic Society on Facebook.
All right, so we're back again. Here we are. We're going to do our last segment here. We've got some quests to do and some divination to do. So let's get back into that. As far as Chemonosis, what were the things that we did there? I was not present for that episode because of reasons.
Well, we had just on the Discord server. So I had mentioned for Kilone that I was giving her a dream tea that I had given to, or I had sold to some other people, and I had given some to Luxa as well, and she had just posted. I tried some of Yara's lucid dreaming tea this weekend with interesting results. I did not achieve full lucidity or actively controlling the narrative of the dream. I know the term lucidity is nuanced, but I did have a much more vivid experience than is typical, and I woke up with this feeling of sureness about some ontological questions I've been wondering about. So that's her experience with that.
Yeah.
I know for mine,
I
had given you
understood some of those words.
I'd given you some of the same tea, Kilone, and I think that was part of my the quest that I had assigned you.
Yeah. So I tried the tea 3 different nights, and the first night I just had the tea late at night before going to bed, and I have to say, as someone who, I do tend to lucid dream and have very vivid dreams naturally, that first night especially, I just felt like my dreams were more chaotic than usual.
Interesting.
And that, for me, the lucidity of the dream was very sort of in and out. There'd be times where I was very lucid and times where I wasn't. And there was a kind of the occurrence of a dream within a dream. Kind of Inception-like, dare I say, not really, but, and actually I didn't retain as much of it as I would have thought afterwards.
Interesting.
Because it was so chaotic, it was really hard to pinpoint. There's just a lot of flashes, certain images and emotions, and things changing, but there wasn't really much of a narrative to it. So the next couple times I tried it, I worked in a meditation before bed, including, and then doing kind of a mantra chant while I was falling asleep about, having a lucid dream, and, one of those nights I didn't remember my dreams at all, which is kind of odd for me, because usually I do. So, right. And then the other night, it was sort of similarly, this kind of chaotic dreams with the lucidity not being consistent. So it's kind of a weird effect on me.
Yeah, so for people who don't normally lucid dream, it opens it up. But for people who do, it nukes that ability.
It just, it was really weird. How do I put it? So I keep saying it's chaotic. It was very chaotic. And usually when I have dreams where my lucidity kind of goes in and out, I'm oddly in control of that. I'm kind of in control whether I'm going to give in to the dream and be part of it, or then decide, oh, I didn't like that part, I'm going to start, going to have a lucid dream or whatever. But like when I had the tea, I felt like I was dropping in and out of lucidity without any control of it. And it made for a very chaotic dream.
Interesting. And then I think the other one that I gave you was finding a basically like a sort of entheogenic or some sort of chemical-based plant that grows naturally in the area, and I think we both kind of discovered it at the same time.
Yeah.
Which was which the one that grows naturally in this area is Illinois bundleflower.
Yeah.
That sounds dirty.
Yeah, it grows primarily on the side of roads.
Yeah. And it basically has DMT in it, right? But it has to be paired with something else.
Yeah. With an the same with like ayahuasca. In order to make it orally activated, you have to mix it with an MAOI inhibitor, which as far as I know, in this area there isn't a plant that acts as an MAOI inhibitor. So really the only entheogenic plants that grow around our area are the Illinois bundleflower, which you would have to somehow extract the DMT from it, and then just kind of ingest it or find a way to ingest it without that MAOI inhibitor. And then there's wild tobacco, which grows in this area. And
well, I mean, you could just smoke yourself some dirty road weed.
And it'll send you to fucking space!
Dirty road space.
Well, we'd also, mentioned, mugwort, grows around here. And that is something that people use for sleeping and to help gnosis and stuff has been used.
Yeah, I remember I went to a pagan festival years ago that was it was on Beltane in northern Wisconsin. And there was so much mugwort everywhere. I think I ended up taking about 10 pounds of mugwort away with me. Because they're like, yeah, it's growing. You can harvest as much as you want. I'm like, fuck yeah! Free mugwort!
And so now there's just 10 pounds of mugwort somewhere. It's like DB Cooper's fucking briefcase.
Yeah.
Or duffel bag or whatever,
right.
But it's got mugwort in it. Instead of, fake money or, I don't know, whatever the fuck he stole.
And then, what was Luxa's quest for you?
Luxa was, asked me to sort of, work with sort of excitatory meditation,
yeah.
Its effects on, dopamine levels and the chemicals and, I don't remember exactly how she put it, but just to explore that as a relation to chemognosis. And so of course, I mean, I have the drum and had some time of dancing and stuff. I felt like I think there's that point, because I think that's what she said. She wanted where's that point, when doing something like that? How do you know you've kind of crossed that gnosis point? And it's not that different from any other sort of gnosis in that, when you cross that point, you're very much, you're in that moment. You're out, you're not thinking about other things and stuff, and you're just experiencing what you're experiencing. The only thing I most regret is, thank you, COVID. I think it's easiest to get in this sort of excitatory gnosis state, going to a live concert or something like that. That's one thing.
Yeah.
I'm very, sensory seeking in some ways, and, going to a concert where it's incredibly loud and lots of people and music and lights and everything, I think it's much easier to get into that sort of excitatory gnosis state, by just, almost just overwhelming yourself with sensory input.
Yeah.
That sounds goddamn terrifying.
Yeah, it's, that's a funny thing about, the, sensory processing disorder is that you can both be very, very sensitive to certain sensory input and it'll annoy the crap out of you and, really get you overwhelmed. But there's also a part of it where you're sensory seeking, where you're always looking for, novelty in your sensory input. And I have a little bit of both. And to me, like going to a concert is very much that high sensory input sort of enjoyment there.
No, I totally understand that, because like I like going to like live shows and shit like that for that like sensory seeking thing, but at the same time, like my social battery runs very low.
Yeah.
All the time. And so like 2 days ago, and I'll discuss this more on the Administrism podcast, but I had someone who had approached me for a healing ritual, and so I did that. And then the next day was fucking Easter, and I had to spend that with my family. And so like I was already overloaded with dealing with people, and then like my wife was asking me a bunch of things to like help her doing things. I'm like, just give me a fucking second. Like, dealing with people is too much right now. And like I had to psych up. Like, I had to kind of like psych up myself to even record this episode, where I'm like, I need to just put myself aside and just be alone for a fucking minute before I can even do this. But yeah, at the same time, like, no, I'll fucking go to shows and parties. That's fucking awesome. I love doing that. But then when it comes to this shit, it's like, God damn it, this is too much people. And it's only like fucking like 8 people that I've interacted with. Like, nope, I need to go into this slow.
Nope. That's like, it's literally just the people. Like, the people, they're like, yeah, it's a concert. And I'm like, cool, loud music, good band. Lots of people, I'm out. Fucking, let me get a concert. Let me go find a band. Like, I understand that part of hipsterism now. I want a band that nobody cares about, so that I can be like one of 3 people just wallflowering, listening to this like
no,
good
it's
music.
Like when you have
and,
a really, really huge crowd of people, then like none of them matter. Like, it's just a mass of people, and you kind of feed off their energy. You don't actually have to interact with them. You're just
yeah, you do. You have to, because they're there. They're just, them being there is too much. Like, it's why I need to get obscenely rich, so that like I can just have concerts at a place where no one else can be. By the way, we have a Patreon.
Nice. So just slip that right in there. Flawless integration.
All right, so let's talk about paradigm shifting and quests that we would have for that. So I have one that's ready. Yara, do you have one? Like,
well, we
or?
didn't talk about this beforehand, so I'm hoping that it's not the same one you have.
No, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can go first.
Yeah, go for it.
So I figure that you can do the same thing that Carol talks about in, I think, Liber Nolan Psychonaut, where you have a 6-sided die, and on each one, you have a different paradigm. You wake up each morning, and as you go through you'll roll the die, and that's what you're going to be in for that day. So, like, one of them, you'll roll it, you get a 3. Okay, you're a Christian for the day. That's what you're going to do. You roll a fucking 5. Okay, now you're a Wiccan for the day. Do something like that. And fuck, you could... I know you're a fucking gamer, so you probably have a D10 or a D20, like however many.
I have a whole bag of dice. Of course, I do.
Yeah, just
use your percentile dice. Go nuts.
Yes.
So using that, pick a bunch of paradigms and you roll it, and until we record the next episode, every fucking day you're a new believer in something else.
Okay.
So I feel like mine kind of plays into that as well, and mine would be to throughout this, like, these changing, like, you're changing into different paradigm and doing different stuff for the day or whatever, right? Throughout that time, write down and try to figure out things that, like, truly, like, the things that represent your core practice. Like, the things that stay the same throughout whatever, independent of whatever paradigm you're in. Find out what those things are.
Okay. Just writing this down.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I will forget.
Someone should.
Don't worry, I will by the next time we record.
I could write them down and forget. Because I'll forget where I wrote them down at.
And then you've just got fistfuls of scraps of paper that you're pulling out of your pockets. What do these words mean?
Or piles of note cards, as I do.
This one is just the L-A-O. You turn it around, it's a guy jacking off. Okay. All right, so now we've got a little bit of divination left to do.
Yes, which we will be doing either... It's either called coloromancy or colormancy. So we're going to be divining based on colors, which I have sent both of you some links. We're going to pick the first 3 colors that it randomly chooses for us and divine Kilone's success or whatever in these challenges based on those 3 colors.
Okay. Sounds pretty good.
So I've got my hex codes, which the first color is emerald. The second color is it's like a battleship gray. That is that color. So emerald,
Battleship gray.
yes,
Okay.
emerald, battleship gray, and then what is the third color? Okay, it doesn't want to tell me what this one is. It's like brownish. It is for those of us, or for those of you who listen or who know hex colors, it's 5D7D20. It's like a brownish green.
It's a healthy glass of brown.
Yeah, it's a brownish green. So based on those colors, I would say that, like, because you've got basically like 2 kind of greens and a gray. They're very earthy colors, and so I'm getting the feeling that you're going to like go towards like or as you like progress through your rolling of die and everything and finding out your core values, you're going to like go towards more earth-based, more natural things, and not so much like the highfalutin kind of ideologies, not like, like Tantra or Gnosticism or things that have to deal with like transcendentalism. You're going to focus or feel more comfortable while focusing on things that are in the present, in the now, in things, especially like as we're coming into and evolving into spring, you're going to focus and feel more comfortable in nature-based things and natural practices and like more environmental causes, or like your place in nature, or you're going to want to be outside a lot more, because like looking at these 3 colors, like emerald, battleship gray, and then this like brownish green color, like those are the colors to me that I see as coming out of the winter. They are the colors that are there as we blossom into spring, and you're wanting to go outside and spend more time outside, and that's where you're going to be more comfortable.
Okay. Speaking of which, could I put Administratum as one of my paradigms?
Yeah, sure. Fuck it. I don't care.
Okay, so I've got my 3 colors here. The first one is a kind of like deep purple. It's the hex code is 67307D. On iColorPalette.com, that color is called Eminence.
Ooh.
So there's that. The second color that is there is the hex code is E4129A. That color, let's see, we'll scroll a little bit. That is a red violet is what it's called on hexcolor.co, but it looks very pink. Like, it looks very fuchsia. like 80s fucking like Ready Player One pink, right? And then the third color we have, the hex code is 8757A1. And let's see here, do we have a color? I'm just getting hexadecimal codes for it. I'm not seeing a color specifically for it on anything. But it is, again, like it's a slightly more muted purple than Eminence, right? So all of these colors to me stand out in kind of contrast to the like earthy tones from Yara's reading. They're a lot more vibrant. They're a lot more synthetic. They're like purple is a naturally occurring color, pink is a naturally occurring color, but not in this much saturation. So I think this has to do with that idea of like sensory seeking, where you're looking for more input on things, and you're looking for like not just more input but more extreme input, right? For that like sensory kind of overload. I think that like kind of the third color being a different version of the first color. They're both purple. The third one is a little more muted than the first one. Has to do with things working in cycles, or there being a pattern, right? There's going to be something, like you are going to find patterns in the different things that you do across whatever paradigms that you're working with, right? You'll find certain things that stick. You'll find certain things that are there. And there will be a certain amount of synthesis to it. Also, these colors, like purple is like, a traditionally like a wealthy color. So I think that this is going to be a either enriching or empowering experience.
Which, I mean, that kind of plays in really well, like with what I had said, and going like with a more nature-based thing. Like at the same time, like you could like embrace the natural world and everything, but at the same time very much be sinking more sensory input. Like you could see like, okay, well, like going out into nature, this is great, and I feel like it's a lot better than focusing on like tantra or like much more philosophical things. It's much more like sensory based, but you're seeking more of that sensory input. So like you're looking into nature, but it's not giving you that kind of like that it's still kind of muted. Especially with the colors that I had received, which is like a brownish green and a battleship gray and emerald. They're still very muted colors. But at the same time, like, you have all these muted colors that you're wanting to go towards, but at the same time, like, you're wanting more. Like, you feel more comfortable going into this, but you're wanting more input. Like, so just going out into nature and, like, doing that still, like, kind of leaves you wanting.
Okay, so my colors, I cannot find names for any of the colors that... like, I've been trying to find names for them, and they're all nameless. I just can't...
Nameless colors.
Yeah.
The color out of space.
Even...
Starring Nicolas Cage. As Nicolas Cage. In Nicolas Cage.
So, my first color is... It's green. It's, like, very green. It's about as green as you can get.
Is it like chroma key green?
Maybe. It's just very standard green. I don't know how else to put it.
Fucking green, Dreadnought. Fucking green.
But, okay. And then my, if you want the hex code, it's 4DAB11. Next color it's a pink, fairly bright, not as bright as the one Dreadnought found, which is really bright. This one's kind of a muted version of that.
Yeah.
CB60A7. And then the last one, which I kind of like. It looks very just red, but it's a slightly peachy red. And that's E35142. Yeah, I like reds and oranges, and when
it's like a coral.
Yeah, it's like a little bit redder coral color. Yeah, kind of a deep red coral, bright red coral. That makes any sense. Anyway, I mean, these are all pretty much colors I like in one way or another. So I think they all clash with each other, which I think is kind of funny. Like,
yes, they do.
None of them really go
Good.
with each other whatsoever. So I think that might be representative of, like, I don't know, really, really deciding to enjoy doing something different each day that might not, they might not seem to go together, but, I like clashing colors. There's something about it I just enjoy, and I think I'll have a good time with it.
Gotta go for the power clash.
I power clash all the time.
Gotta go for the power clash. Yeah, got to. If you can incorporate patterns into it, that's even better. All right, well then I'm gonna call this, it might be a little early, but I'm gonna go ahead and call this a flawless episode. Crime of the century. Perfect.
Primo.
Nailed it. All right, the only thing left we have then is to throw out a real quick Hail Scafuckle.
Scafuckle. I can't talk. Hail Scafuckle.
All right.
There we go.
There we go.
Tripping
All
over my own
we
tongue.
will get out of here. We'll see you next time. It'll be very soon. Until then, peace.
Later.
Be seeing ya.
This has been a production of the Faith Blind Council. Please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/faithblindcouncil. We would also like to thank our sponsors. You can support us by supporting them. You can also contact us on Twitter at FBC Podcast, the number 1, on Instagram at FBC Podcast, and via email at faithblindpod@gmail.com.